Today's episode is brought to you by the Herbal Fertility Handbook by Leanne Moshe, a registered herbalist who specializes in fertility and supports people through every stage of the TTC journey. If you're overwhelmed by conflicting fertility advice, this book blends holistic strategies with clear, science-based guidance. Inspired by Leanne's years of experience as an herbalist and her own fertility and IVF experience, the Herbal Fertility Handbook offers support from herbs, supplements, nutrition, environmental exposures, and lifestyle factors such as sleep, stress, and movement. It brings equal attention to sperm health, an often overlooked piece of the fertility puzzle. Inside, you'll find practical guidance, personal stories, recipes, and nearly 150 scientific references. For a trusted, holistic resource to support your path to pregnancy, the Herbal Fertility Handbook is available wherever books are sold. Building a family can be a complicated, messy, lonely, and sometimes heartbreaking process. But you don't have to navigate this challenging journey alone.
Welcome to the All Paths podcast, where we support and celebrate all of the different ways there are to try to grow your family. We are your hosts, Kate and Emily from the nonprofit organization All Paths Family Building. And today we're talking with Emma about her story and her work in this space. Emma, thank you for joining us today on our podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being with us. So before we get into your story in more detail, we'd love for you to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. So my name is Emma Berens. I guess my story sort of starts with being an IVF baby. I'm originally from Boston, Massachusetts, so excited to be chatting with Emily and Kate today, given the sort of New England focus of All Paths and all the work you are doing in Massachusetts, my home state. And I'm lucky enough to now work on ASRM's public affairs team, and I'm a government affairs manager, mainly working on the federal side, which has been, an interesting past few months. So it's a lot of fun though, and really happy to be here.
Great.
Wonderful.
And you're a Bostonian for life, but right now you live in the Washington,
Yes.
D.C. area, right?
Yes, I do. I live in Washington, D.C. now, but Bostonian for life. I identify with Boston and New England a little bit more,
Of
but
course.
do love DC.
Yeah, very cool.
Thank you so much, Emma. I'm really excited. We're going to kind of talk about your work and your story. So why don't we start with that? Can you share a little bit more about what does being an IVF baby mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's funny. I think especially going through the application process for this job, which I started about 9 months ago, and kind of getting to work with such incredible provider and patient advocates, I've thought so much more about when I found out I was an IVF baby and kind of the exact beginning of this kind of story. So I think I owe a lot of my kind of passion for the space and awareness about this family building, sort of assisted reproductive technology space to my mom. My mom, Patrice, my mom had both my sister Caroline and I through IVF. And I like to say, my parents, they were in Boston at the time, and truly they were able to get coverage for IVF because of the coverage mandate. I think one of the oldest in the country and a really strong comprehensive coverage mandate. So, in a way, I kind of owe my life to the coverage mandate, the advocacy efforts of folks in Massachusetts. But from as early as I can remember, my mom really instilled in my sister and I like a deep appreciation for healthcare and science and the kind of scientific innovation that allowed us to come to be. And so I really don't remember a time when I didn't know. Like my sister and I used to joke that we were petri dish babies and we didn't really know what that meant. But then I think I became a little bit more aware when I was a teenager because my close cousin, who was in Boston at the time, she experienced infertility for a couple of years and then ended up undergoing IVF herself and now has two beautiful, beautiful kids who I used to babysit and just became really close with. And they during COVID moved down to South Carolina. But I think getting to see that like patient experience and getting to kind of see what my mom went through, and now, getting to work with so many patient advocates, it's really rewarding to see, how these amazing people like my mom fight to build their families.
Love that. And so Elizabeth Carr, as you know, is the first IVF baby in the
Yeah.
US, and she lives in Massachusetts, and
Yes.
she is now a member of the All Paths Board. But she has sort of informally, and maybe at some point is going to make it more formal, has created this petri dish posse. And so I think she would bless me to be able to welcome you and your sister
Oh,
into the
She would
petri
thank
dish
approve.
you.
posse for sure.
Yeah, I love that.
And yeah, so I love that you guys called each other that too. Um, do you, and I love how you said this was sort of always a fabric of your family and woven into the fabric of your family and something you always were aware of. Do you remember a first conversation where IVF was explained to you, or do you remember sort of any kind of early explanation of your mom's and path to parenthood?
Yeah, I think it was probably sometime in middle school, when you're in kind of health classes and getting educated and kind of the first exposure to like sex ed.
Hmm.
I think my mom, I remember having a couple of sort of earlier conversations where my sister's a bit older, so she's 5 years older, so she was probably a little bit more aware at the time. But they sort of just, I think we were talking about like conception and how embryos and fetuses come to be as babies and birth and all of that. And I think my mom sort of just said, I just want you to know your story's a little bit different from what, the other kids at school might talk about. And really, I think framed it in a positive way. Like it was never, oh, it took us so long to have you or whatever. It was really always, I mean, my mom would always say, like, we spent a long time trying to have you, and it just makes it all the more special that you're here with us. And so I think it was, we are just so grateful that you're here after, the years of treatment. And at the same time, it was this appreciation for science. Like my mom is, I would say, one of the most trusting of medical providers among people I've ever met. And I think a lot of that is just because she feels like one of the greatest gifts of her life was given to her by medical providers, which I think is something we all can learn from at this time where trust in institutions is kind of lacking and changing. And so that's something that I think was always kind of part of the conversation. Like, this is why we go to the doctor, and this is why we trust doctors, and doctors are the experts.
It's so interesting that you say that too, because I have been feeling kind of struck lately that part of why I feel sort of on such shifting sands with our current
Yes.
political landscape is that I really do trust science. And I feel
Yeah.
like there there have been times where I differ in opinion with people, and that can be
Yeah.
challenging too, for sure. But I think it feels very uneasy to feel like there aren't certain factual things that we
Yes.
can all agree on, or at least have be the foundation of policy or foundation
Yeah.
of just humanity. And so I think I've to some degree always had that, but it's an interesting point that maybe as someone who literally had to rely on science to
Yeah.
achieve our dream of parenthood, that maybe feels even more scary to not have
Yeah.
that you can rely on.
Yes. Yeah, totally. I think that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. It's harder to have like, across the aisle conversations and engage with people who you may not always agree with if there's really no common ground. Like if you just that you don't necessarily agree on what is fact.
Hmm. Yeah, it is very unsettling.
Yeah.
But I love how it sounds like your family or your parents abstractly talked about just how wanted you were and how
Yeah.
wanted your sister was and which always feels like to me it's never too early for a kid to hear that. Like that can
Yeah.
happen at
Never.
any age. But the more
Totally.
detailed conversation sounds like it happened in the context of learning about conception, which I think
Yes.
also makes sense. And
Yeah.
so it sounds like they handled that in a really good way. Did they, and again, you don't have to answer this or, but did they have a specific like diagnosis or, why did they need to turn to IVF broadly or
Yeah.
however you want to explain it?
Yeah. And so my parents, and they got married. It's interesting. My parents got married in their late 20s. And my mom never really expected to experience infertility. And so they waited a few years after getting married to, kind of start their journey and decide to try to conceive. Um, my mom had really unexplained infertility. They thought it might have been related to like a cervical sort of surgery she had had that was very minor, and that might have like disrupted the lining of her cervix, but there wasn't really there wasn't a clear diagnosis. Like she didn't really have an underlying condition that was fully, that the infertility was attributable to. So it was broadly kind of unexplained. But my
Which is not
mom,
uncommon. We
I was
yeah,
unfortunately
yeah,
relatable to a lot
Yeah,
of people.
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and she had a couple of rounds of IVF. So she had my sister, and then and she wouldn't mind me sharing this, but part of my mom's sort of um and my parents' general journey was not only getting pregnant, but my mom always says like staying pregnant was a challenge. But she was really lucky. She went to Boston IVF and then also went to the Brigham and saw Dr. Mark Hornstein and Dr. Oskowitz, who I think has since retired. And it's interesting. I mean, like even in my work now, I love to talk to my mom about like I had a question about a gonadotropin drug a couple weeks ago, and she's like, "Oh, I remember taking that." And um, so it's really, I think, I think in a way it's therapeutic for her to sort of talk about her patient journey. But she I think is very um she was always very open about going through IVF when she was a patient, but I think has recognized how this space has encouraged and kind
Mm.
of welcomed folks to be as open as they want to be, and how I think going through infertility and just infertility in general has become a lot less taboo. I think she's really proud of to see that and to see kind of the community and togetherness that a lot of patients nowadays have, because I think it's great.
So, did your story, your knowing kind of your origin, did that impact your career trajectory? Did you set out saying like I want to be involved in reproductive health and advocacy, or did it just kind of happen by accident?
Yeah, such a good question. So I think what's really interesting is I remember, as I'm sure you both do, and I'm sure so many folks in the space remember where they were and kind of what they were thinking when Roe was overturned. I was weirdly at the doctor's office, and I remember thinking like, gosh, the experience of going to this doctor and just going to the doctors was about to change. And I was, I was in a blue state, where abortion was going to be protected, and I knew that. I was in Massachusetts at the time. But I remember my mom, in particular, when I think during the first Trump administration, and when several justices were appointed that were clearly anti-choice. I remember my mom saying, they're going to come for abortion first, but they will come for IVF next. And that's not to say that that's like, I think, so many folks in this space have worked so hard that IVF is generally protected, but that's not to say that there is not clear and real opposition to IVF that exists in this country. Um, Whether it's fringe or not is, debatable, but there are some folks who, disagree. And I think a lot of that's founded in religion. But my mom always used to say that. And so I remember thinking when Roe was overturned, like, is this going to lead into a general sort of disruption of like the fertility space? And then for a few years before working at ASRM, I worked generally at it was like a healthcare research firm. in DC working on kind of federal regs and understanding kind of the implications of those regs for providers. And we got to work with a whole host of different providers, including some OBGYNs and fertility providers. And so that's kind of when I realized the kind of passion I had for the space. I think having the personal experience and given the circumstances of Roe being overturned, what happened in Alabama, and kind of understanding that from the experience of being like an IVF baby and, talking with my mom about it. I think that is what kind of ultimately, led me to just feel really passionate about the space. And then through my old job, I actually went to ASRM to Congress. We had like educational sort of conference stipends. And so I was like, I want to go to ASRM. I met the government affairs team and just was able to stay in touch with them. I was like, this is such an incredible group of people that I knew I would be really lucky to work with. And then kind of, fortuitously the role that I'm now in opened up. So I think though, generally, I mean, my personal experience was what really inspired me to want to get involved. It's the foundation for a lot of the conversations I now am able to have in the role with folks on the Hill and with advocates. I think, when I was interviewing, there's obviously a lot of patient advocates in the space, which is like so incredible. And it's a little bit less common to be just because of like the timing of when IVF came to be. It's a little bit less common to be, a baby, an IVF baby or conceived through IVF. And so I think it can lead to some really interesting conversations. The last thing I'll add is just, I think I have been able to kind of experience the different perspectives on IVF because both of my parents were raised pretty Catholic. Kate, I think we've talked about this before, but I have a cousin who's a priest and a cousin who's a religion teacher, and I've had some really interesting conversations with sort of those folks in my family who are very like devoutly religious. And so I think that exposure and understanding, like I said, kind of the real skepticism or in some cases opposition to IVF has also, inspired me to keep advocating in the space. I think, but it's a helpful experience to really understand like where those concerns, where that opposition comes from, and what it's rooted in.
Yeah, and I think it's great to still have an openness to having those conversations, even though honestly, even myself, sometimes I don't have that.
Oh, and sometimes I don't either. I mean, there's been a few, but sometimes just like it's hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I do think, I mean, I do feel like, again, I very much worry if and when we get to the point where like just people stop talking to anyone that they disagree with, that is going to be very scary and wrong. And as hard as that may be on a given day, I think we have to keep trying to understand each other. Again, we
Right.
likely won't necessarily agree, but understanding where the other person is coming from is key to trying to
Yeah,
figure out
it
how to
is.
change their mind in some cases,
Yeah.
or even just to
Mm.
have common understanding. But yeah, one of the most powerful stories I've ever heard about when the bill in Massachusetts was being considered that ultimately became the infertility insurance law in 1987. The lead sponsor on the Senate side in Massachusetts was a staunch Catholic. He was getting a lot of heat from
Yeah.
the Catholic Church, but
Yeah.
he had a quote that was something, and I might butcher it a little bit, but I loved it. He had something to say like, I have been in meetings where the couple sitting across from me is holding their much wanted baby in their arms. And I would suggest to the Catholic Church that it is a difficult thing to tell them that this technology should not exist. And I just love that. And that took a lot of courage. I mean, similarly, we heard from
Yeah.
policymakers and legislators also here in Massachusetts that were very Catholic, but were very pro gay marriage and LGBTQ
Right.
marriage rights. And they had to similarly take a stand where they said,
Yeah.
I can appreciate where some of this is coming from or all of this is coming from. But at the end of the day, like I am going to vote with my conscience, which tells me
Right.
that these things are not only okay, they are wonderful, they're incredible, they're amazing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it was
Yeah.
really cool. Well, so
Yeah.
speaking of one of our favorite topics, which is advocacy, from your like personal and professional experience, like what advice do you give people to, they might be IVF babies, they might be IVF patients, they may be currently trying to grow their family, and they're like, I want to advocate, but like, what do I do? And how do I do this? How do I even get started? What advice would you give them?
And this is actually a great question. So my cousin, who I mentioned earlier, who went through IVF in Boston, is now actually in South Carolina. So I had sort of a very similar conversation with her recently, because Senate Bill 323, which has now been defeated, which is
Hmm.
amazing, but it was a total abortion ban and could have implicated IVF. She actually went to the state house for one of those hearings. So I think the best advice I would sort of give, and my boss, Jesse Loesch, is like the best at this, is just really plugging into local coalitions and really letting local coalitions who have boots on the ground, who know the state, letting them lead and letting them sort of direct us and gather docs, pull docs in to, send them to. So in the case of South Carolina, Ren was just phenomenal in kind of doing exactly that. They brought, so many patients and advocates to testify at that October hearing. And I think plugging into kind of the state coalitions is really great because I mean, the quote, all politics is local, is kind of evident here. And like you are able to, while you're able to kind of advocate and plug into what's happening at the state house, you're also able to oftentimes find community. And so I feel like there are so many benefits to being involved in your kind of local, whether it's kind of, whether it's all paths and, sort of regional groups or sort of the state fertility alliances or fertility groups that are doing such wonderful work. Like we absolutely at ASRM love to work with those state groups because, like I said, we love to let them lead, but then we also love to bring in kind of our knowledge of the federal landscape and also bring in when we can, docs and kind of the practice committee guidelines and bring in kind of the scientific medical material that can be really helpful at the state level too. So I would say plugging into local coalitions is probably the top thing. I think the only other thing I'll add is my mom has commented on this as well. Like I think it can be, I mean, of course, every experience for every patient is different, but and my cousin actually commented on this. It can be really therapeutic for folks to be involved in advocacy and to kind of help the next generation or the next few folks that are going to go through treatment to help protect access to that treatment that, for my cousin Chrissy gave her two beautiful kids, or for my mom, gave her me and my sister. So I think in that sense, it can also advocacy can be just a beautiful tool in multiple ways.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, and that you don't have to be an expert. I think plugging into other people that are doing this makes you realize that like you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to know on day one what you're supposed to say or how you're supposed to do it, but just that your story is the most impactful part of this, and
Yeah.
others can help you with the nuts and bolts of how to do it, but like every one of us that contributes to a cause like that makes a difference. So that's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the most rewarding part about your work if you had to pick one thing?
Oh, I think it's seeing policy move. And that's like such a broad answer, but I think about, and I came in at the very tail end of this kind of effort, but like California SB 729, I think about South Carolina defeating, whether it's defeating sort of a personhood bill or advocating for a mandate, it's seeing not only policy move, but seeing minds move. And in that, seeing the opportunity for protecting and expanding access to family building services. So I guess in general, though, it's honestly more than just changing policy. It's also changing perspective. Um, so I think about, like I said, South Carolina. I think about in Tennessee, there's kind of an ongoing effort to codify kind of a separate regulatory system for Tennessee to be able to regulate IVF clinics. And just in conversations with, we have a great state lobbyist down in Tennessee, but just kind of in those conversations, each conversation is like hopefully moving the needle by changing a perspective slightly and saying, sort of like you just commented on, Kate, like, you may be religious and you may have some concerns or skepticism around IVF, but these are the ways in which IVF is pro-family. I like to say, like, I am from a Catholic family and I was born through IVF, and my mom went to like our local priest, Monsignor, when she was trying to conceive, and sort of said similarly, like, I understand the church's opposition to this, sort of, but really, like, I don't understand how you can sit there and say that I should not be a mother when it's like the number one dream I've had since I was young.
Mhm.
And there is a technology out there that will help me to do so. So I think it's more than just changing the policy. It is like changing perspectives, even if it's slight. Just kind of seeing like the look in people's faces when they start to understand it more, when they hear patient stories, when they hear stories of patients who took out second mortgages on their homes or sold their cars, when they hear about patients who took up second jobs to get the benefits. When you see those kind of wheels turning in someone's mind, um, and start to understand that infertility is a disease, and it is not often treated like one when it comes to state coverage and when it comes to insurance coverage. So I think that that's, yeah, kind of the changing of perspectives, which often hopefully translates to the changing of policy, which hopefully ultimately helps, millions of people, like in the case of California, to have access to building their families.
Love that. And speaking of changing minds and perspectives, could you talk about restorative
Oh my
reproductive
God.
medicine? Have you heard of
I
that? Are you familiar with
definitely
that
can.
term?
I definitely can. I mean, I came on to ASRM, like I said, about 9 months ago, and I feel like since then, the like RM fight has been at the core of what we've been doing, and what we've been trying to, I guess, push back against. I will share that this past week I was at the American Medical Association House of Delegates, and we were able to get a resolution adopted that basically says that the AMA sort of acknowledges that RM is like is a rebranding of a lot of what reproductive endocrinologists, IVF docs, urologists do on a day-to-day basis. And essentially, also confirms and acknowledges that REIs do the diagnostics, the treatment of underlying disease that RM providers are sort of, in a sense, trying to co-opt. So the resolution is it's entitled Protecting Access to IVF Amidst RM Legislation, and our efforts are really, um, aimed at helping folks to understand the threat and danger that RM legislation poses to access. Um, but I guess I'll start with, RM is an ideologically driven sort of movement, mainly advocated for by the Heritage Foundation, Ethics and Public Policy Center, this group called the International Institute for Restorative Reproductive Medicine. RM isn't new. It's gained traction over the last year because of the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again movement. But like NAPRO technology and the Creighton model date back to the 1970s. Basal body temperature tracking dates back to the 1930s. The IIRRM, this institute, has been around since 2000. Like, none of this is new. It's the circumstances are ripe for this movement to like to the forefront. We sort of at the beginning asked our docs to help us come up with like analogies um to help folks understand what RM is. And one that we've sort of relied on a lot is it's like diagnosing someone with high blood pressure, and instead of prescribing them a statin, which is, an evidence-based treatment that they know is medically going to help that condition, recommending that they make lifestyle changes and helping them with like a weight loss plan or something along those lines. So I think, broadly speaking, like I said, this isn't new. It's kind of rebranding of a lot of the, hormone panels, blood tests that reproductive endocrinologists do on a day-to-day basis. But it's really important that we look at the source here. Like the Heritage Foundation and Ethics and Public Policy Center are far-right think tanks that do not support IVF. They believe in personhood. They're anti-choice, anti-contraception. Like these are the groups that call contraceptives abortifacients. And so if we look at the sources, the efforts here are not, if you, like I said, if you look at the sources, these efforts are not just to create some kind of alternative to IVF. Like their ultimate goal because of their belief in personhood is to limit access to IVF. And so one thing we've been trying to do a lot at ASRM is, while of course it's okay if patients are choosing to pursue, more natural methods prior to starting with an IVF doc or with an REI, that is completely okay, and we would never want to vilify patients. But at the same time, there is this political RM threat in this legislation, right, where they want to divert Title X funds from family planning clinics that we see right now and make all of the employees at Title X clinics, at family planning Title X clinics, be trained in fertility awareness-based methods, and where they want to, prohibit discrimination to any provider that refuses to conduct ART or refer to ART. They're essentially trying to protect docs who are refusing to in any way engage with IVF. And then there's also on the federal level in the Restore Act that was proposed, there's efforts to just legitimize RRM by creating CPT codes through the fee schedule for RRM. And so I think, like I said, there's this, while of course we would never want to vilify patients, and that remains an effort, we do want to educate patients and make them aware of what RM is. It's very confusing for patients. I mean, this whole area, right, is so confusing, and the medical terms and the science thrown at you. And so we just want patients, we want patients to have access, right, to the whole full spectrum of evidence-based treatments, but we want them to also, if they are to see an RM provider, to understand that that provider is going to diagnose with something, but the sort of treatments that they're offering, are very, 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 very limited in scope. Like I think one thing that's really helpful to say is we like to say REIs and RM doctors may both diagnose, but it's really the REIs that are actually treating that diagnosis. RM providers are treating in a very, 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 very narrow scope of treatments, and they are really carving out evidence-based treatments like IUIs and IVF. And so I think it's just really important that patients know that when they're going in. Like our concern is, of course, a lot of this treatment is time sensitive. Delays in care can be detrimental to someone's, possibility of conceiving. And so we just want patients to be aware ahead of time and understand kind of what care they're going to have access to if they go to X clinic versus Y clinic. And
Yeah.
then
And I think
finally,
that's,
oh yeah,
I was
yeah,
just going to say, I think
yeah,
that's part of why it's so scary is that it,
yes,
it isn't, it shouldn't be an either or. Like, even to take your
no,
analogy further, it's like,
yes,
if you need a statin and you make lifestyle changes,
yes,
both would be
yes,
helpful. But I think this kind of RRM to me very clearly was being like, suddenly, like, it's not new, but suddenly the
no,
light was being shined on it as
yes,
an very clearly as an alternative to
yes,
IVF.
yes,
Not that, and I think we could all agree that more investment in
yes,
addressing and recognizing some of these underlying causes would be great, but
yes,
not instead of or completely at the
exactly,
exclusion of IVF, I think is what is so scary.
exactly. And I think that's like the bottom line is IVF includes, right, a lot of this diagnostic sort of treatment. IVF includes that. RRM excludes IVF. And so, we want patients to have access to as many options and treatments and patient-centered care, a patient-centered, care plan that aligns with their goals and belief system. And I think at the end of the day, it shouldn't be an either or. And the sort of RM proponents are unfortunately posing it as that. The only other thing I'd add is just so much of this space and so much of this conversation about coverage, of course, brings up the topic of insurance and health insurance. And I think one of our major concerns is that because our providers are framing themselves in this type of quote unquote treatment as an alternative to IVF, one of our concerns is that, insurers are going to see this as a sort of path to not cover evidence-based treatments like IVF and instead to only really cover like the diagnostics, which of course is going to be cheaper because they're excluding a treatment. And so if, insurer, like let's say that a given insurer says, oh, there's two different types of infertility treatment I can cover, RRM and IVF, I'm going to choose to cover RRM. That has grave implications for people, especially,
Yeah.
like I said, with time sensitive care, where delays can be so detrimental to someone's chances of conceiving. So that's a big concern from our
Yeah.
perspective.
I'm
Yeah.
glad you mentioned that. And not to pile on too much, but I'll add two more things that are concerning to me. One
Yeah.
is that it doesn't mention men at all or
No,
any kind of
no,
male partner issue.
it doesn't.
So that increases stigma, I feel like, and
It does.
everything. And also just there are certain conditions that lead to infertility that cannot be restored, if,
Right.
and so I think there isn't a recognition of often the very clear medical reasons that people need science and
Yes.
need best practice fertility treatment. So I'll just leave it there on that on RRM. But thank you for sharing some of that because I think it is very depending on how it's framed, it sounds like, sure, yes, why don't we all support this? But I think,
Totally.
as always, I think the devil is in the details, and things are not always what they seem
Absolutely.
and it's sometimes very just really effective branding and messaging, but not
Mhm.
when you
Yes.
pull back the curtain.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. Which can be deceptive.
Mhm. It's infuriating, and I'm sure we'll have lots of more conversations about
Oh,
this
it
going
is. It
forward.
is. The
But
marketing and the way
yeah.
that they frame it is like, it's so, you're right, Kate. It sounds really, it's a lot of this kind of maha, like root cause,
Mhm.
holistic. I think what's really frustrating is a lot of the framing as like, sort of empowering to women.
Right.
It's very confusing.
It's yeah. And you can't say that it's patient-centered care if you are removing options. The whole point of patient-centered care is that the patient is at the center. They are making the
Yes.
decisions. Everything is about
Yes.
their best interest.
Absolutely.
But if you're saying that it's patient-centered, but oh wait, but we don't offer X, Y, or Z, like that's not patient-centered
Exactly.
anymore. You're
No.
removing their choices.
Right. Totally.
That's infuriating.
It is.
But
It is.
thank you for the work that you're doing, trying to
Thank you
help
so
educate
much.
people and help them realize and make those informed decisions when they are choosing a care team that they
Oh,
Need to be
it's,
thinking about certain
yeah.
questions to ask.
It's helpful. I mean, a lot of the staffers we've spoken to haven't heard of it, which is, good in a lot of ways, but then also there's the concern, right, that the first time they hear it, it's from heritage or it's from. So
Yes.
I always say, like, it's so great if we are the first people telling them what this is, because we are going to
Yeah.
frame it in a way that, like, you need to be aware and you need to look out for this. In sort of a, not to be doom and gloom, but you need to watch out for
Hmm.
this movement and this really kind of deceptive, confusing framing.
Yeah, 100%.
So, given kind of your unique perspective, both as an IVF baby and also someone who works in this space, what is one thing that you would say to somebody who might be just starting to grow their family now?
Yeah, I would say, as much as the person is comfortable, like there is, especially even when I talk to my mom about like, 25 to 30 years ago versus now, there is such a community in this space. And there are, open arms waiting to sort of support you and welcome you and carry you through this. There are so many resources in like the people in this space, and then also just in the plethora of like online materials and, sort of patient guides and patient resources, whether it's on social media, which, comes with its concerns, of course. Social media is kind of a double-edged sword, but there are there is just a community of people who are going through this, have been through this, who are advocating for folks to be able to go through this, of docs, of patients, of IVF babies, waiting to sort of support you through this and to really be there for you. I would say also, my mom went to the I think it's called the Mind Body Institute. I want
Mm.
to say, was it
Mm.
Beth Israel
Boston,
or
Boston,
Boston
oh yeah,
IVF,
but also
the
Beth Israel did have a Mind Body Institute
it
also.
might have, yeah, or
Yeah,
it might have
yeah,
been, yeah, it was
yeah,
somehow through healthcare in Boston. And she always says, like, for patients, it's so important, especially with the landscape and news, and to really like protect yourself and protect your headspace and protect your mental health, and take breaks. I think especially when there's so much going on and it's so important to be informed, but it's also really important to take breaks, especially when you feel like a type of care you are receiving is so at the forefront and so at the kind of center of politics. Something that should not be politicized has been politicized, which is, the right to build a family. And so, yeah, I would just say like there is just so much support in this space, and take breaks, take care of your body, take care of your mind, and know that, whatever you kind of choose in the advocacy realm, if folks want to become involved, we welcome them. If they, choose to kind of watch or be on the kind of sidelines cheering us on, like, we thank you and welcome you. And patient advocates are at the heart of all this. So we thank them for being open and being there.
that's awesome. I love it. It's interesting your mom bringing up the whether it was the Domar Center, that's I forget what their new name is, but
yeah,
that's RRM. Read through
Yeah.
the things they offer. Like that's
Yes.
this is
Yeah.
not new. This is something that clinics and
Right.
like REs have been
Such a good
offering
point.
for years
hmm
because they know that it is, there are certain things that can help impact your chances, but you are doing those in conjunction with
Yeah. No, you're
evidence-based
so right.
fertility treatment.
And not or.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So the other question that we like to ask folks, and it sounds like you have a pretty unique perspective again, just given, your family's story and broader extended family as well. But how can you show up for a friend or a family member who is struggling to build their family?
I mean, I think this goes back to just generally, everyone's experience looks so different. But I think health and health challenges are uniquely individualistic. and so person dependent. I think just having a listening ear is a listening, non-judgmental, just supportive ear, um, is so helpful. I mean, my mom, like I said, was really open when she went through treatment, but I actually found out like last year, my best friend, one of our best family friends, was born through IVF, and none of us had known that her mom went through treatment. And I think every person is going to choose how open they're going to be based on their comfort level and their point in their journey. And it's so individualized and personal. And so I think just listening and letting them be as open as they want to, just kind of being like, I don't even want to say a sounding board, because just being an ear, and not necessarily even asking questions, but just letting them know that like you are there. Healthcare can be really scary, but this type of care is so, it's so personal and so vulnerable that I think just knowing that you have like love and support in your life can make such a big difference.
Love it. You were raised well, girl.
Thanks.
I'm a proud auntie. I'm just like, it's cute. It's so sweet to see how your
Thank
personal
you.
story and your own family has impacted your professional journey. I just love to
Thank you.
see it.
Thank you guys for having me on. No, this was like so great, and also just is so just rewarding to get to work with people like you both and get to do it. So,
That's
and it's such a
awesome.
crazy, like insane time.
I know. Well, we need
So,
you. We need you more than ever, and we need these voices changing people's minds. Because even us in New England, we've successfully defeated, knock on wood, personhood bills in the
yeah,
past by just raising awareness that
right.
this would basically end IVF as they know it in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they don't want that. A lot of people, like
No.
even sponsors of personhood bills, sometimes don't understand that's what they would do. And
Right.
then
They don't.
when we would tell them, you'd literally watch them be like, oh, we didn't
Yeah,
mean
like,
to do
ooh,
that. And
yeah.
I
Oh,
mean, obviously, we believe in the full spectrum of reproductive health care and don't want them to do anything that
right,
limits reproductive health care. But I think
right.
it has helped the cause to have these fertility stories be part of the narrative to say, like,
Yeah,
you say you're pro life and you say you're pro family. What is more pro life and pro family than trying to bring much wanted lives into the world? And
absolutely.
not everyone, we're not obviously not going to change every mind, but we've literally watched people pause and go like, oh, like,
Yeah,
oops,
yeah,
we didn't mean to do that, which has been great. So, and that's why,
totally.
like you said, I think coalition is so important and
Yes.
it's needed more than ever.
It's so important because everyone knows someone
Mhm.
or most people at least, know someone who has either been conceived through IVF or has, received treatment to build their families. And it's, I mean, we always say this, but like infertility does not discriminate based on
Right.
religion, religious
And political
affiliation,
party. Yeah,
or political party, or
absolutely.
it affects everyone.
Yeah.
And so, it's a it should be, because it affects folks across party lines, it should really be addressed across party lines.
Yeah. And it should be nonpartisan.
Yeah, it should be. This was so great. Appreciate it. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Thanks,
Emma.
Emma.
We hope you'll join us next time for more family building stories and resources. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you never miss an episode. And follow us on social media at allpathsfb or visit our website, allpathsfb.org, for more information about our work. All Paths Family Building is so grateful to the members of our circle of support who are vital to our ability to provide emotional support, education, and advocacy that is open to anyone struggling to grow their families. Today, we want to give a special thank you to our bronze sponsor, Boston IVF. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please help spread the word so that anyone who is struggling to grow their family can join the conversation. It's an honor to walk with you on your family building journey.